Thanks for attending today, Emily. I really appreciate having you here. My name is Victor Camacho, and this presentation today is on how to maximize your SAT score. So we're going to actually talk about study techniques, how to get really good at studying for it, what exactly to do, and also just some basic testing strategies that are important to master that are probably not as obvious as what to study. So let me start by just introducing myself really briefly. So my name is Victor Camacho. That's my picture there. I went to the University of Utah to pursue a PhD in mathematics. The ABD means I haven't quite finished yet. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called High Performance Tutoring. And since 2011, we've been helping a lot of students with math and science tutoring, as well as one-on-one SAT and ACT prep. I've tutored myself since 2003. I've been a math lecturer before and a math and science teacher, and I've actually lived here in Coronado since 2018, and I've loved every minute of it. So why don't we jump into it? So I know that there are probably some people that have no idea what the SAT is, and others who have perhaps taken it once or twice, or at least taken a practice test. So just real quick, for those of you that don't know, the SAT consists of 4 sections. There's a reading section in which you are expected to read a passage and then answer some questions that come after. There's a writing language section in which they've written some paragraphs of text and deliberately made mistakes, and they've underlined them, and you have to kind of pick out the correction, the correct replacement of the underlined portion. And then there's 2 math sections. There's one math section in which you are not allowed to use a calculator, and then another section in which you are allowed to use a calculator. And so to be able to do pretty well on this test, you'll definitely need to have decent reading comprehension. You'll have to also read at a relatively quick speed. You'll also need to review fundamentals of grammar and punctuation, as well as fundamental ideas in math, especially algebra, geometry, and arithmetic. Okay. So how is the SAT scored? Let's talk about that really quick. So those of you that don't know, you get 2 separate, they score 2 separate sections of the test. The 2 verbal sections, the reading, writing, and language, you get a score from 200 to 800. And same thing with the math. Those 2 math sections get combined and you get a score from 200 to 800, and they add those together. And so your overall score, what you're really aiming for, is they give you something between 400 and 1600. Obviously 400 is if you miss every single question, 1600 if you get all of them right, and then everything in between. And just to give you a sense of where you would want to score most likely, 1000 is the average score. So your average student is going to score 1000. If you get that score, about 50% of students that took the test will have scored higher than you, and the other 50% lower. Most 4-year institutions want you to score above 1000 at minimum. They likely won't even accept your application or consider it if you've scored below 1000. That's changed a little bit with COVID, but for the most part, that still continues to be the case at many institutions. So now if you get above 1000, of course you will be considered, but you're not going to be super competitive necessarily, because so many other students that are applying will have scored in that same range. So to distinguish yourself a little from most of the rest of the pack, you want to aim to get above about a 1200. So just to give you a sense in where you should kind of set your goals. And if you're looking to get into a really good school, like let's say Stanford or Harvard, or someplace at this caliber, you should be aiming in the 14 to 1600 range, or at least that's what's recommended, right? That will be somewhat competitive to get into those schools. Now, even getting a 1600 doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get into any of these schools, but it greatly improves the probability. Okay, so if you apply to 10 really good schools that you want to get into and you get a low SAT score, you might get into 3 of them, right? But if you get a high SAT score, you might get into 8 of them, say. I don't know which 8, but you see how it increases your chances. You get more options, typically, the higher you score on the SAT. So that's one motivating factor as to why you would want to score well. All right. Now, with that being said, how do you score well? How are we going to maximize our SAT score? Get it as high as possible so we have the most college options and the most scholarship opportunities and everything else that comes along with a high SAT score. All right. Well, we want to create a study plan. How do we do that? So First, you got to figure out what date you're going to take the test, right? You determine your baseline score, you set a goal, create a study schedule, and then create a study strategy, just like it says here. Now let's kind of walk through those a little bit more slowly. So here are the test dates in 2021. Now you might think carefully about like what date you pick, because, you know, for example, some kids might think like, oh, well, I'll pick like the May one. That's you know, going to come up. But if you're taking a bunch of AP classes, you're probably going to be doing a lot of prep for AP tests right around that same time. So you might think to take the one in June. Because then, you know, you'll have a month after all your your AP tests are done, and you'll be able to concentrate more on the SAT during that last month. Another good option that a lot of students might choose is to do the one in August. Notice that there are no SATs offered during the summer. So what you could do is while you're on summer break and you don't have the burden of school and classwork and homework and whatnot, you can study for the SAT during that time. You can take advantage of those months and get really good at it. And then so, you know, by the time late August rolls around, and of course you'll be in school, but the very beginning of the school year it tends to be a little easier than the middle and the end. So, you know, you can take that test while you're still fresh. You still remember everything that you studied, and you don't have too much of a burden from school conflicting with your SAT studying. So just kind of keep some of those in consideration when you're picking what date that you would like to take the test. You should probably plan on taking it 2 or 3 times. If you've never taken it before, you know, you might plan on taking it a couple times. 2 or 3 times is pretty typical for a lot of students. You don't always get the score that you want on the first attempt. Okay. Now, how do we establish a baseline score? Well, you want to take a practice test. An official practice test is what I recommend. I realize that Kaplan and Princeton Review and some of these other books have tests in there, and you know, they tell you how to score them. But if you really want an authentic test, you want one created by the same people that write the SAT, which is an organization called the College Board. They have an official SAT prep guide. That's the blue one that I've depicted there. It's available on Amazon for $20-something, possibly even less. They've got their free PDF version of all these tests, of about 8 different tests, available on their website, collegeboard.com. So between those tests, you know, they also provide all the answer keys, the explanations, and the instructions for how to score your test. And I would do that. I would take the test, get a baseline score, see how you do, and then go from there. Okay. Now, what do you do with that? Well, you take your baseline score and you set a goal. And ordinarily, a reasonable goal for students that are willing to work hard, put in a lot of practice, is, you know, we have found that we can boost scores by about 200 to 300 points. Okay, and so what that often does is it bumps students up at least one category. So if you're in that, you know, above average range between 1,000 and 1,200, we can usually get you into that competitive range. Or if you're in the competitive range, we could often bump you into the Ivy League range. It just kind of depends where your start is. So set a reasonable goal as to where you want to be. Nothing's impossible, but, you know, it wouldn't be quite as reasonable to expect, you know, if you scored a 980 to be able to go all the way up to a perfect 1,600. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely, and it'd be very difficult to do that. But, you know, going from somewhere slightly below 1,000 to about a 1,200, that's much more reasonable. Okay. All right. Then create a study schedule. Now, based on our experience working with students on this test, what we have found is that most students, we strongly recommend spend at least 6 to 12 weeks studying for this test. Okay, so that's about the time frame you should be looking at. So when you establish what date you're going to take the test, you can sort of, you know, count backwards and figure out, well, what would make sense in terms of when I should start studying for the test. Okay, and in terms of the hours per week, we recommend anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. Obviously, the more, the better. But we recognize also that, you know, different people have different, different loads of work that they have to do between school and sports and other extracurricular activities. So do what you can, but we recommend 3 to 5 hours a week. We also recommend taking practice tests relatively frequently. So every couple of weeks, every 2, maybe 3 weeks, we recommend that you take a practice test. Okay, so you could do this on the weekend. This could be on a Saturday or something like that. And, you know, you sit down for 4 hours or whatever you got to do, crank one out. think of that as like a dress rehearsal. You're going to take that, see how you do, and you can adjust your studying accordingly. We'll talk about that in a little bit better in a minute here. But no matter what you do, it's important to be consistent. A lot of students will get all excited and start out okay, but then won't really have the tenacity or the grit to just kind of continue to grind through and study over time. Okay, so now after you kind of set up your schedule, like when, it's important to figure out when you're going to do this, right? Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as well as Sunday mornings, try to establish a time and a space where the studying is going to take place. That'll keep you on track a little bit better. But also you want to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to study? Like what am I going to do? What's the strategy here? So first of all, you want to understand what resources are available to you. Obviously, there's lots of published SAT prep books out there, and those are really good. There's a lot of really good ones. Obviously, I mentioned the College Board book, that blue one from earlier. I recommend everyone get that one. But then, you have some options in terms of other companies that provide good supplemental materials. The Kaplan book is really good. The Princeton Review book is really good. So is the Barron's book. They're great publishers. They have a lot of really good strategies. A couple books that I also recommend for the extra practice, if it's really like kind of conceptual things that you need to practice more. The Panda books are really good. There's these books called the Panda SAT Math and Panda SAT Writing that are really good. I've used those with a lot of students in the past, and they're great for drilling on grammar and math skills. They don't have as much about testing strategy, but they have a lot about reviewing fundamentals. So in addition to books, there's also free online courses, something like Khan Academy. These also could sort of be classified as automated online courses, and there's both free ones and paid ones, and Khan Academy is kind of like the most famous one. When I say automated, I mean that there's a bunch of videos you can watch and practice problems you can do, and they'll give you immediate feedback. They'll be able to tell you whether you did it right or wrong, but there's not really like a teacher. I mean, the video is kind of teaching it. They've got stuff you can read, but you don't have really someone you can ask questions to. So these tend to be cheaper, and they're still good, but they're not quite as good as actually having an instructor. So, there's then you've got your live small group tutoring, which there's plenty of companies that do that. By making it a small group setting, it does cut down the price a little bit because you sort of, in a way, split the instructor's cost among 4 or 5 students. The smaller the group, the better, obviously. But the optimal thing to do, if you have the means to, and it's in the cards for you, is to do one-on-one tutoring. That's what we most strongly recommend. One-on-one tutoring, because you will, basically get all your questions answered. The entire course is tailored just to you. It's not kind of shared with 4 or 5 other students. And you can work around your schedule. There's not fixed times when the tutoring happens. If you go on vacation or something like that, the tutor can often, or the program can often adjust with your schedule. So those are just things to keep in mind. There's lots of advantages to one-on-one tutoring. Okay, and also the tutor can typically, or any of these programs, especially the last 2 options here, can really keep you on task. Sometimes when you're studying independently, it's really hard to have the discipline to stay focused and always, study every Monday from 3 to 5. But if you have a tutor and, that's kind of your cue, oh, I got to get to my tutoring session, I got this homework to do, and they'll be a good guide for that. Okay. The things that you would have to review, no matter how you decide to study, any program that you're in or any studying that you do independently, you want to make sure that you review fundamental math and grammar. That's a given, because that's going to be on the test. Practice your reading comprehension. Practice testing strategies. These are things that any good program will go over, and books like the Princeton Review and Kaplan will talk about them as well. So it's good to read them and practice them. You want to take lots of practice tests, because that's how you get better at this. This will both help you practice taking the test, obviously, but it'll also serve as a good assessment to see kind of where you're at. How effective are your study methods, right? So make sure you take plenty of these, as I mentioned in a previous slide, and become familiar with the different question types. That's actually important, and a good program will help alert you to these different types of questions that you're going to see on the test. And, eventually, if you get good enough, you'll be like, oh, it's one of these types of questions. So here's how I'm supposed to analyze it. Here's how I'm supposed to look at the reading passage. And, here's where those details might be. Or it's this type of math question. Oh, yeah, I remember. So on these type, I'm supposed to look for this. There's lots of different types of questions. And the more types that you've kind of memorized, the more you can really cut through these and and answer them efficiently and accurately. Okay. The other thing, and this is just kind of a general principle about studying, is these things called power cycles. We strongly recommend that you do these power cycles. Here's kind of how it looks, right? You take a practice SAT, or the ACT if you're planning on taking that one. You score the test, figure out how you did, and then you identify your areas of weakness. Now, any good program and any good tutor worth their salt is going to have you do this, right? Take the test, there's some sort of assessment, let's score it, figure out what you did wrong. Let's try to find a pattern in the types of questions that you're missing. Are you constantly missing trigonometry questions? In which case, let's go over that. Or on the reading section, are you kind of running out of time? Well, maybe we should have you practice reading faster, right? To teach you how to speed read a little bit. Are you constantly missing the types of questions that, are having to do with commas and things like that? Well, let's review how commas are used properly. Let's talk about sentence structure. Okay, so you want to identify the areas of weakness, and then you got to create some sort of program or strategy for how you're going to improve. Those last two things, the last two steps of the 4-step power cycle, are not always obvious for someone studying independently, but usually a good program will help both with the identification of those types of things and with the process for how to get better at them. Okay, it's not always like if you find that you're missing a lot of geometry questions, it's not necessary to go open up a whole geometry book and review everything in there, because the SAT doesn't test you on every last geometry topic, but it does test you very well on a small number of very important topics in geometry. Okay, all right, then let's kind of switch gears now, talk about testing strategy. So what we just talked about, just to recap, was how to study for the test, right? That was what the previous set of slides were, was how to get good at studying, how to create a plan and whatnot. Now let's just talk about some interesting strategies, and you'll be able to read about these in certain different textbooks or different prep books that you go through when studying for the SAT. But let me kind of highlight some of the important ones, and I should emphasize that there are many strategies that are out there that are worth knowing. I'm going to talk about 4 of them, 4 of what I consider to be the most important. I think these are the 4 most important strategies. There's many others that are also important, but these would be my top 4 if I had to choose any. Okay, they are personal order of difficulty, process of elimination, plug in the answers, pick a number. You'll notice they all start with P, and I call them the 4 Ps. They're very important. All right, so first off, personal order of difficulty. Okay, here's this diagram again, right? With the 400 to 1600. You remember I showed you that before. But let me talk about this a little bit differently though. To get a 1000, to get a score of 1000 on the SAT, okay, it turns out you only need to answer half of the questions correctly. You don't have to answer, a lot of students when they take the SAT, they're thinking like, oh, just like any other test, I have to answer all the questions. Well, not really. Depending on what your goal score is, you actually don't. If your goal score is actually just to get above 1000, for some students, that is their goal. You only need to answer half of the questions correctly. So you don't, there's, and the easier half, right? You don't have to really answer them in order. In fact, we suggest that you don't. You shouldn't answer the questions in the order they're presented. You should answer them in order of difficulty. And so that's sort of the first thing that we suggest, or answer questions in order of difficulty, not in the order of presentation. So your own personal order of difficulty. Okay. Just to give you a sense, so to get 1000, you only have to answer 1 out of every 2 questions correctly, half the questions. To get a 1200, okay, to make yourself competitive, you actually only have to answer 2 out of every 3 questions correctly. So you can afford to skip 1 out of every 3 questions on the whole test, and you'll get a 1200. If your goal is a 1400, that's a very good score. Actually, not many people score that high. You can afford to skip 1 out of every 6 questions. So you got to answer 5 out of 6 correctly. Of course, if you want a 1600, then you really are trying to actually answer all of them correctly. That's a different story though. Not everyone's at that level, but this just gives you kind of a rough sense of where you want to be at all these different levels. Okay. Now, why would you want to answer questions out of order, right? Well, you're trying to maximize your score. You're not necessarily trying to answer every question. So like, here's a perfect example. And, ordinarily when I'm doing this presentation, I'm abbreviating it today a little bit, but I'll actually go through this exercise with students and I'll say, answer these 6 questions without a calculator. You only get 60 seconds. Ready, set, go. All right, now take a look at these and imagine what would happen. What if I told you that all 6 of these questions are worth the exact same number of points? Like, they're all worth exactly 1 point. And I want you to get as high of a score as you possibly can in 60 seconds. No calculator, right? Now, imagine, like we could all probably agree that it would not be ideal to start with question 1 and spend your time trying to figure out the answer to that one, or question 2. The first 2 questions are the most difficult questions to answer, arguably, on this entire thing, right? In fact, the easiest question is the last one. I actually deliberately engineered this so that it was in the reverse order of difficulty, okay? So you would probably want to start with the last 3. I'm sure most people could probably answer the last 3 questions. And so most people that attempt this will probably be able to get 3 points if they do it optimally, if they work out of order. Now, if someone were to stubbornly work on these in order of presentation, and say, well, I'm gonna try to do number 1, and I'm not gonna move on to the next one until I finish answering number 1. I'm not gonna, you'd probably get 0 points on this. You'd probably run out of 60 seconds before you even had a chance to finish. Okay, so you don't want to let this happen on the SAT. It's if you only need to answer half the questions correctly to get your goal score, it's a matter of figuring out which 50% of questions those are. The easiest questions aren't always the first ones, right? They're kind of scattered throughout the test, and you want to be able to quickly identify which one those are. Okay, so without even learning any new math or grammar or anything else, or improving your reading speed, you can often improve your score pretty greatly by simply mastering this strategy, by simply mastering timing, okay? By learning to quickly recognize which questions are easy and which questions are difficult for you, skipping over the difficult ones and making sure you get all the points on all the easy ones before attempting any of the hard ones, okay? So that's strategy 1. And in case you were wondering what the answers were to these questions, here they are. Okay. Strategy 2, process of elimination. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about this before. I'm sure you've all heard, oh yeah, we'll eliminate the ones that are obviously incorrect. But I want to take it a step further and just tell you that a question is only as difficult as the answer choices are. Okay, you can make a question easier or more challenging based on what you make the answer choices. And I'm going to give you some examples here on how this will work. Okay, so the first example I will ask is, who was the president of the United States when the Titanic sank in April of 1912? Okay, now I'm sure nobody listening to, probably very few people listening to this actually know the answer to that. I've asked the same question to a room full of adults and no one knows the answer. Maybe your US history teacher knows the answer, but this is a pretty obscure thing to just know off the top of your head, right? So I'm sure most people, you ask them this question, they will have 0 idea who it is, 0% chance of getting this correct. Okay, now what if I gave you answer choices? What if I gave you these answer choices? Okay, most people will probably still have no idea who it is. Most people may not even recognize the names of many of these people. I mean, most people recognize Theodore Roosevelt, I think, but maybe not the other ones, right? And, but at the very least, because there are answer choices, you actually have a 25% chance of answering it correctly, as opposed to a 0% chance of just happening to guess a name correctly. Now, the reason this question is still a little difficult is because the 4 answer choices here are all close to being the right answer. These men were all 4 presidents, and they were all presidents in the early 1900s. And they're all reasonably close to having been president in 1912. Okay, so it's a little challenging to do this one. Now, let me give you a different set of answer choices. Okay, let's say these were the answer choices: Barack Obama, Donald Trump, George Washington, and William Taft. I bet now most people looking at this question would probably be able to identify the correct answer. And most people would be 100% certain that their answer is correct, right? So we basically went from a question that we had no idea what the answer was, right? We had probably a 0% chance of answering it correctly. And now almost everyone looking at this is probably 100% certain they know the answer. And it's all because of the answer choices. Okay, so the moral of the story here is the answer choices can make a question, that might seem impossible, actually very simple to answer. Even if you couldn't go all the way here, let's say hypothetically there was a student who looked at this and was like, okay, well, I know it's not Obama or Trump because they were presidents within my lifetime, but I'm not sure when George Washington was president, and I don't even know who William Taft is. So for all I know, it could be either one of those two guys, right? They would still have a 50% chance of answering this question correctly, which is better than a 1 in 4 chance than if they had no idea, if they just took a completely random guess. So the process of elimination is actually good even when you can't eliminate all the way, because it still improves your odds of guessing correctly. Okay, now it does another thing too. So the process of elimination not only can help you answer questions sometimes that you have absolutely no idea how to do, it can also help you answer questions more quickly, even ones that you do know how to do. So I imagine a lot of students watching this who have taken algebra or algebra 2 or pre-calculus would actually know how to find the correct equation for the line. Like they said, what is the equation for the line in the graph? Many students will look at this and say, oh, I think I know what to do here. So we got these 2 points, so I got to find the slope of the line. Okay, so the rise is, let's see, it goes down 6, so the rise is -6. The run, it goes from -1 to 2, so the run is 3. -6 divided by 3 is -2. Okay, so the slope is -2, and then I got to find the y-intercept, and so you could go through that process, and that's fine, and that might take you 30 seconds or a minute or something to do that. However, if you look at the answer choices, 2 things immediately pop out, right? First of all, if you look at the line clearly has a negative slope, right? So you could look at the answer choices and say, oh, well, A can't be the right answer because the line has a negative slope, and answer choice A is suggesting it has a positive slope, so that can't be right. The other observation you can make very quickly is that this line has a positive y-intercept, right? The y-intercept is above the x-axis. So you could actually rule out everything except answer choice D. Answer choice D is the only one it could be. All right. The answer choices here actually made this question much simpler than it might have otherwise been. This question might have otherwise been a little challenging. It might have taken 30 to 60 seconds, possibly, even though you knew how to do it. But these answer choices made this very simple. You could have answered this in 5 seconds and moved on. Okay. Now, obviously, we could have chosen different answer choices. We could have chosen answer choices that were all ones with the slope being negative and the y-intercept being positive, and then we would have to do a little more work. But these particular answer choices made it easier. Okay. And the SAT tends to throw you freebies like this more often than you think. There are more questions than you might imagine that have this type of thing where if you're paying careful attention, you can actually easily eliminate certain choices. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the third strategy I want to discuss with you guys today. So strategy 3 is plugging in the answers. Okay. The way this works is you want to test out each answer choice, using a sort of back solving method. You want to plug in the answers and just test them to see if they work. So let's put this into practice. So consider this example. If the absolute value of 6 minus 5y is greater than 20, then which of the following is a possible value of y? All right, now I imagine that many people watching this forgot how to solve absolute value inequalities, right? You might have learned it at some point. You might have never learned it, and so in which case you have no idea what to do. Like if I asked, which values of y would solve this, what are the range of y values that would make this true, you probably wouldn't know what to do. Many people watching this would not know what to do. Okay, but that's not exactly what the question is asking. It's not asking for all the possible values or the range of possible y values that would solve this. It's just asking which of these 4 would work. Apparently only one of these 4 numbers solves this inequality or makes this inequality true, and you just have to figure out which one of those 4 it is. So you can literally plug in each of the answer choices until you find the one that works, right? So that's what we've done on the right over here. We've tried plugging in -3, then -1, then 3, and then 5. It turns out that answer choice A, plugging in -3, makes this work because 21 is greater than 20. Okay, now you still had to have some basic knowledge here, obviously, right? You still had to remember what an absolute value was. You had to kind of understand what an inequality is. So you had to have some basic knowledge here. But you didn't have to remember the more challenging process of solving an absolute value inequality. That's something that many students might have struggled with. But by plugging in the answers, right, trying each of the answers out until you find the right one, this was a good strategy here. Let's look at another one kind of like this. What if they said, if tangent of x is less than 0, which of the following is a possible value for x in radians? Okay, so now on the surface, this sounds like, okay, well, first of all, you kind of have to have some knowledge of the unit circle here. You gotta kind of know what radians are and how they compare to degrees. You have to understand how the tangent shows up on the unit circle, and when it's going to be negative. All those things combined, a lot of students might not have all of that in their head, or even if they had at one point, they may not have memorized it and know it right now while they're taking the test. However, provided this is a question in which you're allowed to use a calculator, this one is actually a lot easier than you think, because you don't really have to, have an understanding of the unit circle and all that stuff. You just have to know which one of these values would cause, like if you take the tangent of it, would cause that to be negative, right? Which one of these angles will have a negative tangent? So if you have a calculator, you could easily just plug each of these in, and here's what you would get in every single case. And notice only answer choice C would give you a negative number. Okay, so when it is applicable, the plug in the answers technique is actually very powerful. And that's I know that both the Princeton Review and Kaplan both discussed this at length. It's a very powerful strategy. I'm only giving you 2 examples here in which it could work. There's a huge breadth of different types of problems and examples where this could work. Now, the fourth strategy that I'll talk about, pick a number. This is an even more robust strategy, and it can work in a lot of different situations to help you answer questions that might otherwise seem impossible to answer. By the way, the pick a number method and the plug in the answers method, these should be used most often, usually the best time to use them is when you have little to no idea how to actually answer the question, or at least how to answer it quickly. Okay, these should be reserved. Like if you already know how to do it, just do it the way that you're confident and know how to do it. If you're not sure what to do, or you don't believe you know how to answer the question quickly, then you can rely on a method like this. Okay, like on pick a number or plug in the answer. But let's talk about what pick a number is. So basically what it is you plug in your own numbers, not necessarily the answers. The answer choices are not necessarily numbers, or at least not numbers that are useful for you to plug into something, right? You pick your own numbers and then kind of test out what happens, test out the different answer choices. So let me give you an example of this. So let's say they give you this kind of question. If the radius of a circle is tripled, how many times larger is the area of the new circle than that of the original circle? Okay. So, right, the radius was tripled. So what happens to the area? Now, most people would look at this and say, oh, well, doesn't the area just triple also? And that seems like reasonable, right? I mean, I think most people would probably guess that if they didn't really know any better. It turns out to be incorrect, though. But then on what basis, why doesn't it triple? And how can you prove that, right? Well, one thing to notice here is that whatever it multiplies by, whatever this rule is, it apparently works for all circles, because they didn't give us specific information for one particular circle, right? They didn't say, oh, just assume that you have a circle of this size and then you triple the radius. What's the new area? How many times bigger is the new area? This apparently works for all circles, because they didn't really specify one circle to do this to. They said, you take any circle, apparently, triple its radius, and the area will always multiply by the same number. So what you could do here is just create your own circle. Well, apparently it works for everything. So let's just pick a circle. Probably the simplest circle is just a circle with radius 1. If a circle has a radius 1, you can calculate its area using the pi r squared formula. That's a good one to remember. Area of a circle is pi r squared. They give that to you on the test. There's a formula sheet on the front of the SAT, but it's worthwhile memorizing these types of formulas just so you can work through the test more efficiently. Okay, so so we're going to pick a circle of radius 1. So the area is pi r squared. Pi times 1 squared is just pi, 1 pi. Let's triple the radius now. So now the radius of that bigger circle is 3. Okay, so the area is pi times 3 squared, or 9 pi. So look what happened to the area. It went from 1 pi to 9 pi. It got 9 times the size, right? And since it happened to this circle, apparently it happens for all circles. If you don't believe me, you can try it out with a different one. You could try a circle with a radius 2. So pi times 2 squared would be 4 pi. And, then triple that, right? So 6, so radius is 6, pi times 6 squared would be 36 pi. So you went from 4 pi to 36 pi. That's also a multiple of 9 increase. Okay, it went up by a factor of 9. Okay, so this happens every time. So you just needed to choose one example, test it out, and see what happens. And then now we know it goes up by a factor of 9, so we select answer choice D. Okay. All right, so I just, we didn't have a lot of time. Usually, it's worthwhile taking a lot of time to really go over this stuff. There's whole books written about this, and of course, people sign up for entire courses on this stuff, which I recommend doing. It's very effective at helping people improve their score. But let me just kind of recap on what we talked about today. So, there's the planning. We talked about planning, and we talked about strategies. Okay, so in the planning, you want to pick a test state. They're all available on the College Board website. Establish a baseline score by taking a practice test. An official practice test is ideal. Set a goal score. I recommend somewhere 200 to 300 points above where you scored as your baseline. Create a study schedule that you're going to stick to. Create a study strategy, right? Figure out what resources you're going to use. And figure out what you need to review. Now, of course, if you sign up for a program, this kind of takes care of all that, right? Because they'll help you set up a schedule. They'll have all the resources for you. They'll, show you what to do. They'll give you homework. They'll have the materials for you. That's the kind of thing we do. There's other companies out there that do the same thing. Okay, and we talked about power cycles as well. So whether you're studying independently or in a program, that should be a crucial part of your studying. And then we talked about the 4 Ps, the testing strategies, right? Personal order of difficulty, process of elimination, plug in the answers, pick a number. Those are just 4, I believe the most important 4, but they are 4 of many testing strategies that are out there. And any good program or any good prep book will introduce you to at least several more really good strategies. Okay. So now if you guys have any questions, anyone watching this, has any questions or wants help creating a plan or wants to know more about resources that are available for SAT prep, you can feel free to contact me personally. My name again is Victor Camacho. You can reach me at that number or that email, and I have my personal website, mycoronadotutor.com. As I mentioned, I also own and operate a company called High Performance Tutoring, and here's the contact information for High Performance Tutoring, the number, the email, the website. You're welcome to contact them as well. You'll reach my secretaries, and there's several tutors that work under me, and we can help match you with whoever. It doesn't have to be me, but I do a lot of tutoring myself, and I'd be very happy to work with anyone. If you want to call me or text me and just get my general advice on how to prepare for this or how to create a plan, I'm more than happy to help you do that, to identify the right resources to help you study. And of course, I'd be delighted to work with you one-on-one if you would like to go that path as well. So feel free to reach out to me if you would like. I'd be very happy to work with you. But anyway, thank you, everyone, for coming and listening. And I appreciate everyone's interest in trying to improve their SAT score. Happy to take questions.